I think one of the funniest things for me to remember about the Division franchise is just how close I actually came to not playing it. When the Division launched in 2016, I did end up playing the beta, and that was like in like January or February. I don't exactly remember when, but I did play the beta, and having come from Destiny, so I was doing the raids and playing with my group and everything like that in Destiny, and I actually loved that game. I thought the story was obviously pretty stupid. I mean, we all know that. Actually, I guess most of us probably know the issues with Destiny's story, but besides for that, I loved the gameplay. I liked the exploration, the secrets, and all that stuff. That was fun for me. Fast forward, to the Division beta, and the third person almost killed this game for me. And that's kind of funny to think about because I actually really love the third person. And currently, the thought of playing Destiny kind of makes me cringe a little bit. Like, I don't want to go back to Destiny, and I don't want to play through, the reduced RPG aspects of that game. And so, I almost quit the Division because of the third person, just because I wasn't, used to it. Coming from Destiny, wasn't used to this, and it just didn't feel immersive to me. So I think it's kind of fun to, just remember what you originally thought when you actually played a game. And, this is kind of what I'm experiencing going through the Division all over again. Now, in this video here, I'm actually going through the Subway Morgue mission, which is technically the second mission in the actual main story. Now, depending on how fast you progressed or what you actually did, coming out of Brooklyn, this is possibly the first time that you encounter the Cleaner faction. Now, for me personally, being a fan of RPGs, I kind of had high hopes for the Cleaners. And that was because, a lot of the times when you're playing these types of games, the nuances of each faction, the differences, that kind of builds the game to me. Showing these differences, experiencing these differences as you're actually playing through, building different strategies or having different play styles depending on the faction that you're fighting, and of course having different builds that may be a little bit better at fighting each faction. And this was kind of one of the biggest things that disappointed me basically about the Division, and even Division 2. I mean, it's a common issue in Division 2 as well. There's a little bit more effectiveness with the factions depending on which one you're talking about. But as a whole, all the factions in both the games just kind of don't really inspire build diversity, right? So going back to the Cleaners, I was highly anticipating this is going to be the fire faction. I mean, if you think about a fire faction in pretty much any game, you think about a lot of fire damage. You think about probably needing some protection from fire damage, some interesting fire-based mechanics, that kind of stuff. So when I actually fought the Cleaners for the first time, I was pretty disappointed. I was anticipating that fire would be a much more important aspect to their missions, to their actual character design. Now I know the assault cleaner, which is just the regular guy with the tank on his back, and then they have the I think it's the incinerator cleaner. Yeah, I think his name is the incinerator. In Division 2, I think it's just the heavy, but in Division 1, the big guy was called the incinerator, and he had the 3 tanks. Well, yeah, they use fire. Okay. And they have fire grenades. Gotcha. But that was pretty much it. Like, their flamethrowers, besides for the big guys, really weren't that big of an issue. And even the big guys, again, were only really an issue if you didn't know what you were going to fight. Like if they just all of a sudden came out of nowhere and were able to hit you with the flamethrower, that at that point they were dangerous. And I was kind of really hoping that we would actually see more intricacies with the way that they actually used fire. A lot more investment into status effects than we saw in Division 1. I was kind of hoping that Division 1 would have status effects more akin to what Division 2 has, where they're actually life-threatening and dangerous. Because, then something like Pharaoh's Mask, which, obviously it didn't come out at this time, but Pharaoh's Mask was an interesting design, but because of the way that the Division was designed, a lot of these status effects didn't really mean anything. and you couldn't really buff up burn duration to any significant, importance, then that mask, which allowed you to basically ignore the actual status, you'd still take damage, but you would ignore the status effect. That mask pretty much was useless. It didn't offer really anything for anyone to actually consider using it. And it was just disappointing. Like there's so many little quirks that they could have taken advantage of, so many differences that they could have used to just accentuate the classes or the different factions, and they just never really filtered that out. They never really sorted the whole game out, and that was kind of a huge disappointment for me. Now, of course, we would talk about Dragon's Nest, which was a incursion. I think it was the second or third. I don't necessarily remember which one in the order, but when it came out, I was really, really hoping, like, okay, this is the cleaners' time to shine. Like, this is going to be some fire, love, and stuff here. And you go through it, and pretty much, right off the bat, it's not really that exciting. I mean, the Four Horsemen was a fun fight, but it wasn't, it wasn't like, oh man, I'm fighting the cleaners. It was just like, okay, I'm fighting some cleaners, and there's 4 heavies. And the final boss, which was the fire truck, was actually a much more interesting concept than the first Incursion's APC that launched the missiles. I mean, it was kind of a very similar, I guess, boss style fight, but they did add a lot of that fire to it, and I really liked that. I really enjoyed the fact that this fire is going to get you, and you have to avoid it. You have to put down an immunizer. You have to freaking make sure that your healing is on lock, and everybody's kind of squared away with what they're doing. And it was disappointing that was the only moment where fire actually plays in any real account. And real quick, this mechanic right here, where I'm actually putting in the relay to the power box, that was something actually, oddly enough, I really missed that in Division 2. I don't understand why they took out like mechanics like that. I mean, I'm not saying everything should be a carry mechanic, and I'm not saying that they should always have like some sort of gimmicks for every single thing that you're doing. But I really like the idea of being forced to carry something to a certain point while only being able to use your pistol. I thought it was a interesting mechanic. Not only did it kind of encourage you to actually use your pistol, not only did it actually encourage you to have a good pistol, it just kind of felt different from just everything else that you did, going up and hitting a button. And that's something I really, oddly enough, I just kind of missed it in Division 2. I kept thinking to myself as I was running through the main campaign, like, where's the boxes I'm supposed to carry? Where's the, different mechanics of this game? It just, it just kind of, it didn't feel right that there wasn't something like that in the game. But anyway, now, back to the cleaners. We're running through the subway morgue, obviously. I really did love this mission. Just the design, the aesthetics of it, it really felt good. I mean, it felt interesting. It kind of showcased a lot about the ideals of the cleaners, their whole plan to burn out the infection. And of course, where better place to go than a giant cemetery, an underground system filled with dead bodies and caskets and body bags. And I mean, that is someplace where the cleaners would go. And I mean, I really wish they would have added more fire to the actual level. I think that would have been a good touch. I really wish they would have had some secret contamination areas. If you watched the last episode I did with the Madison Field Hospital, where I talked about my disappointment with how little the contamination masks got used, how little point they actually had in the main story. I think having this area filled with, different contamination mask levels, where, the first time you run through it, you probably won't be able to go through any of them. Maybe you run through it again just to get one that you can get now, and then maybe by the time you get all of your masks, you want to run through it again just so you can see what contamination, treasure you can find, or what secret area you can find. And that was kind of the same issue with with a lot of the missions. I really wish they would have encouraged this mechanic more, especially with the cleaners. I mean, just contamination masks, considering that's what they are doing. They are specialists in getting rid of the virus, or at least attempting to get rid of the virus. And that's where you're usually going to find them, in near infected, contaminated areas. So it really would have made more sense for this faction to actually have some sort of role, at least a larger role in that aspect. Now, another thing that kind of bothered me about this mission was the fact that, I mean, you look at the mission, it's huge. I mean, there's tons of pathways in this mission. And much like a lot of the missions, you kind of end up getting this either very straightforward pathing, or you end up getting this kind of loop-de-loop pathing where, you go one circuit and then maybe you're walking over where you were just at previously. But then, you could just keep going in a loopy-loop. And that's kind of the case with the Madison Field Hospital. Obviously, you go through the mission, you go up, you go through, and then you take the elevator, and then you're above where you were, and then of course you just kind of take the rafters up to the roof, and that's pretty much it. But I mean, look, if you've ever been to an arena, or like a concert venue, or a sports venue, you've probably been to a stadium, and we all know just how big the stadiums are inside. I mean, just the amount of concessions and everything that they have. So, I mean, they could have made the Madison Field Hospital a lot bigger. They could have put in alternative pathing in that mission and made it really interesting, depending on, like different difficulties, or maybe even made some randomness to it. Like, now this time you're going through this path, the next time you're going through this path. And the game just kind of, mixes it up for you. And the same thing with the subway morgue. The subway morgue is huge. Obviously, it's a in construction rail system, right? So in construction subway system, and you've got all these different little areas and nooks and crannies that you can see as you're walking through the actual mission. But it never lets you go anywhere, and that's the one thing that just kind of, it makes me mad just universally about the Division franchise. We saw some improvement when they did the seasons in Division 2. So when you ended up going through the, the Roosevelt Island for that one incursion, where they actually changed the pathing a little bit. They added those flame turrets and stuff like that. Anyway, most of those missions that they redid them slightly and it added a little bit different pathing. They added some new mechanics to them, and it made them feel good. They were actually interesting. It was fun to run through them again. Even after you've run through them, dozens of times before that. But the change up made it interesting. And with every mission in the Division, usually they end up picking larger areas, with the exception of a few outside areas. But even then, I mean, that's, depending on how many buildings or how many, stairwells or how many little plank board bridges that they include, you can make those areas pretty big. But so they have access to this huge expandable area. They could easily open up a door, design a new room, make something different, right? They obviously they're not really going based on facts of, the layout of specific buildings. They largely make it up. So why can't they just take another door and make up more hallways for it? Make up a different path that takes you to the end, or maybe, on a rare occasion, or maybe you get some sort of special mission or secret, or there's plenty of different things. Look at Destiny, like I was already talking about. There's plenty of alternatives for things that they could do in the game to switch it up, right? But why don't they? Why don't they add these alternate paths? Especially if they're going to make it the end game, where okay, you're just going to farm heroic or legendary or challenge mission, whatever. If that's their intention from the beginning, to make you come back to these missions over and over again, why did they never include alternate pathing? I mean, this mission would have been a perfect example of good ways to increase, the level design, to mix it, to mix it up, to change it up and make it fun again. And like I said, that's a huge problem in just the franchise in general. The fact that once they complete these missions, they largely abandon them. I mean, in a lot of other games, you get reverse mode where you play the missions backwards, or they increase the enemy makeup, or they just make it different. They make it feel different. And the Division, they tried to make it feel different by like, okay, now we're gonna put in the Black Tusk. And I mean, I don't know about you guys, but all the Black Tusk missions I did, I I didn't really feel a huge difference. I knew that it was the Black Tusk, but I didn't care. It wasn't like, oh man, I'm playing a whole new. No, it was like, oh god, I'm playing this mission again. It didn't even matter that there was Black Tusk instead of the regular enemy because largely the enemy factions themselves, again, don't matter. When you can't really tell, much differences. I mean, look, if you look at the different factions, besides for like grenades, you don't really get a difference. I mean, the Black Tusk are the only ones with the little freaking remote controlled machine gun and the Warhounds, so that makes them a little bit different. But besides for that, there's nothing. I mean, you could pretty much just be shot at by any regular enemy, and you wouldn't have any real clue. I mean, maybe if you've played the game a lot, if you mixed up the skins a little bit, you might be able to see some difference. But for the average player, for somebody who's ran through missions, 3 or 4 times, you're not going to see anything. You're just gonna be like, okay, this is the same stuff. So that's something that I found a bit annoying. The fact that they don't accentuate the differences, the fact that they never really go back to missions and improve them or revamp them. Just the lack of, I guess, thinking in an RPG. That's really kind of what bothered me with the game. There was no real interesting secrets to find, even in Division 2. Besides for the masks, which I didn't care about, you don't really have any interesting like secrets. You go through a mission, you do some like random stuff. Some people don't even see a lot of these triggers, right? They don't even see a lot of these patterns that you have to interact with to activate like a special door. So for the most part, most people are going to ignore it. Those few people that actually do trigger these things, that do actually figure out the pattern, figure out how to activate stuff, they get this door and they open up a chest, and it's the same stupid junk that you don't want during, pretty much every chest that you find. And so it's like, why? Like, why do they not add things to the game to make it interesting? Why do they not add randomness to the actual game to make it feel unique and make things feel different? I mean, I'm not saying the entire game should be the underground, because, that's not the kind of randomness I'm talking about. I'm talking about like a controlled system where, there's like 2 or 3 different options for this mission, or a possibility that anytime during a mission, a secret door could be open, but it's not guaranteed to be there all the time. Something that just kind of makes it a unique experience, that where you're actually wanting to look and wanting to find things for a specific reward or something like that. Like, let's say if you find all of these, you collect, these pieces, a lot like you did with the beginning of the game in Division 2, where if you collected a bunch of the weapon parts, you could get the exotic weapon, right? I wish that kind of stuff would be included in these games, because, I mean, they're vast. I mean, they're huge. How much effort does it take to put in, like 4 more hallways and 2 more large rooms? How much effort does it take? I mean, maybe they're limited by the height of whatever, they're making, because obviously a building's only so high and they have to work within the confines of that building. But, it's easy to see that most buildings in the game do not utilize that entire interior aspect. Like, if you probably zoomed out, you'd just see a large empty square with some hallways running through it to connecting to different rooms. And so there would be plenty of space there to actually connect new hallways to new rooms. Or they could even go down, obviously, if they just put in an elevator, which is something that they largely like to do in the game, where they put in the elevator, it doesn't necessarily mean, the height that you're going to. It just kind of transports you to the place that they want you at. So necessarily you could put in an elevator and it doesn't actually have to go up or down. It could just go over. And that's something that we actually see in the summit. The summit doesn't necessarily match up. It just kind of, you enter it and then it teleports you to the next elevator, wherever that's at. So They could easily do this where they just teleport people into a basement area or some place below the actual level where it continues on to, a new part of the level, and maybe they add in a stairwell that finally connects back to the main mission or something like that. There's plenty of options. There's plenty of things that they could do, a lot of things that they could use to keep the game interesting, and that's the biggest disappointment I have for a live service game. I mean, how can you call it a live service game if you don't actually make it live service? And that's kind of one of the funny things. A lot of developers don't like working on live service games because, obviously it requires a never-ending development cycle. And I get it. But how can you actually complain about a live service game if you're not live service? If you're not constantly actually pushing out content, if you're not constantly working on the game, if you're abandoning the game for the second game, if you're abandoning the game for Star Wars or Avatar or whatever, I'm sorry, but it's not really a live service. Putting in cosmetics is not a live service. Adding the occasional silly event where you just rehash the mechanics that are already in the game isn't a live service. So, I don't know. I really wish that they would actually take the effort to improve their game. I wish they would actually make the effort to add things that make the game fun and unique and interesting instead of just kind of sitting on the tried and true failure methods that they've been doing. But anyway, that's kind of all I wanted to rant about today. I did enjoy going back through this mission. I do like, remembering what happened in the past. I do like remembering my personal feelings about the game as I play through it again. It's fun and it's kind of like a unique experience. And generally speaking, I'm not willing to do that on most other games because I really don't really have the passion or the interest to play through a lot of games multiple times like I do with The Division. The next mission I'll be doing will be the Hudson Refugee Camp. So thank you guys for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one.
See what you can find out. I'll let you know which shit to hook up. Careful this fucking city doesn't eat you too.